This week on the show, we're going to cover FreeBSD 11.1 release since it's out now, and we look at building a BSD home router, which is cool. People want to check out. But also we look at your own OpenBSD VPN provider and how you could do that. And to finish that off, we also give you a view of how to find the matching glob pattern that can be simple and fast, all in one big show of BSD. Now, BSD Now, episode 205, FreeBSD turning it up to 11.1, recorded on the 2nd of August 2017. Hi, I'm your host, Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
A new week, a new exciting FreeBSD show for you, so we should get right into our headlines this week, which is the major one, I guess, this week and the week after as well. FreeBSD 11.1 release is out, so people can now grab it from the FTP servers. And what's in the release, Alan?
Yeah, so you can head over to freebsd.org and download FreeBSD 11.1. You can get it as an ISO, as CD or DVD images, USB stick images of various types. There are pre-built VM images in VMDK format, so that's VMware, but also works with a lot of other platforms. VHD, which I think is Microsoft Virtual PC. QCOW2, which works with Linux KVM and VirtualBox and so on, as well as QEMU. And a raw image, which will work even with FreeBSD's Beehive and with any other VM that's out there. There are also cloud images. The IDs for all of the Amazon EC2 instances in all the regions are listed there. There's also the commands you need to set it up on Google Compute Engine or Microsoft Azure. And there are also Vagrant images, so you can set up temporary machines that way too. We here at the show would like to give a big thank you to everyone involved in the project, especially the release engineering team who put all the time and effort into making sure this release was good and that it came out on time. They made the exact schedule this time, so that was great. All the FreeBSD developers who contributed the features, especially the ones we're going to talk about, the companies that sponsored some of these features and paid the developers to work on them, and all the users who tested the betas and the release candidates like we asked, so that all the bugs were fixed before the release. Yep.
It gives you a kind of an idea how big a release is. I mean, people are like, well, there's a new version coming out, but behind the scene, there's a lot of work going on to have a release in the first place. So that's an achievement each time.
Yeah, if you combine all the names that you would find if you followed every link in the release doc here, you would find that there were hundreds of people involved in making FreeBSD 11.1 what it is, and we're very glad that they did. So some of the features that are here are BlacklistD has now been added to OpenSSH. So that's NetBSD's system for dealing with blacklisting brute force attacks and so on. The big improvement here is that it's an agnostic API that can be used in many different applications, and eventually we'll be able to block attacks across all the different things in your system. It's very nice. The cron utility has been updated to add support for include files in etccron.d and user local etccron.d by default. So any files put in those directories will be included into the cron tab, which will allow things like packages to automatically install a cron tab and then update it and remove it as you upgrade and remove the package as well. So that would be quite nice to have. And syslogd got a similar update so that you can include fragments in the syslog.conf from etc syslog.d and user local etc syslog.d. The Zfs boot CFG utility was ported back from FreeBSD 12 to 11.1. This allows you to provide a one-time boot.config style set of options. In particular, this allows you to say, the next time, but only that time, boot this boot environment instead. So you can say remotely update a server by creating this new boot environment and then say reboot into that new boot environment one time. I'm not changing the default, I just want to do it once. If it doesn't work, you just remotely power cycle the machine and it goes back to booting normally and your system's back up. It makes doing an upgrade a lot less risky.
Yeah.
So this works by, in the ZFS label on the front of the disk, there's a bit of padding before the image or the data. And in that padding, we write this information, and the bootloader reads it and checks it. Once it reads it, it overwrites it with zeros, so it only ever happens once. So even if something crashes even halfway through the boot process, or even before the kernel's even loaded, because something's wrong with the bootloader, it gets done by the very first bootstrap part, and so it will mean that after a power cycle, your machine will always come back. So that's nice. Werner Losch also ported back his Efi Var Utility, which allows you to provide an interface to manage Uefi variables. So you can control some of the stuff in your BIOS and how it boots your system with that.
Yeah, don't delete the Uefi variables. Like
Yes.
there was a problem a while ago on
Some Linux users having that problem. Yes. This particular next one, I think, will answer a couple of emails we got about a month ago. In 11.1, they ported back some other feature where IPsec is now a loadable kernel module, so you don't have to build it into the kernel. You can just load it and not have to recompile your kernel. And that also means that the TCP MD5 kernel module, which provides the MD5 signatures, is now a loadable module. If I'm not mistaken, that should mean that those users that were trying to do BGP, and I think it was Vultr, the VPS provider, to do high availability, will be able to just load the kernel module on 11.1 and not have to try to recompile their kernel. So hopefully one or more of the people that asked us about that are watching and can try upgrading to 11 and seeing if the kernel module does what they need and makes that just work for them, which is the hope. A number of updates and new modules for IPFW, including network prefix translation for IPv6, which is RFC 6296, and both stateless and stateful NAT64. So Yandex is a big search provider and ISP in Russia, and they needed these features, so they implemented them. They also implemented a module or a framework in IPFW for allowing you to modify packets as they transmit through. And as an example, the one they've implemented is changing the minimum segment size of the packets in TCP as they go through, and rewriting basically the text when it's a TCP SYN and modifies what the MSS is going to be. There's been a huge array of driver updates. I can't possibly go through them all in the amount of time we have here.
It's a lot.
But network drivers, storage drivers, all kinds of drivers got updated. There's updated support for Chromebooks, for Intel Bay Trail SoCs, lots of stuff like that. The Chelsea 10, 20, 40, 50, and 100 gigabit stuff. The Atheros Killer NICs got updated, all kinds of stuff. Lots of work going in there. What else we got here? The NFS client now supports Amazon's Elastic File System, or EFS. So that's great. Big one that we've been talking about a bit lately is Zfs Compressed Ark is on by default, and the first release with it will be 11.1. So this means if you upgrade your system from FreeBSD 11 to 11.1, suddenly you'll start seeing this extra line in top, and you'll see that all the data that's compressed on your disk, when it's cached in RAM, it'll be the compressed versions that's cached, meaning it'll take less room to fit those files in your Ark, which means with the same Ark max set, you'll be able to fit more data in RAM and get more of your data being fast and have a higher cache hit ratio. So basically free performance just for upgrading.
Yeah, just that is well worth the upgrade.
Yep. The EFI loader now supports TFTP-FS, which allows you to fetch not just the loader, but files over TFTP, meaning you can actually do a boot that doesn't require an NFS server at all. And another change that went in is that the loader can now be built with TFTP and NFS support at the same time instead of having to compile it as one or the other. So in general, the net booting stuff has gotten a lot better in this version. And then, yes, if you follow the links in the show notes, you can find the full release notes, which has even more, the errata list for which security vulnerabilities and so on were fixed since 11.0, links for all the downloads, a signed copy of the release announcement email with all the hashes in it, so that when you download files from FTP, you can verify their hash from a GBG signed email by the release engineer. The actual announcement text, all that stuff is in the show notes.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff to go through. And of course, trying it out for yourself is the best way to experience the new release.
Yep. I'm looking forward to upgrading a bunch of our machines to 11.1 after I get back from BSD camp.
Oh, yeah. There's a couple of machines that are in need for FreeBSD.1 on my servers. So, yeah, it'll be a good upgrade to do.
We're down to just 10.3 and 11.1 servers here, except for some stuff that's running ahead. So I think I'm going to leapfrog. All of the 10.3s will go to 11.1, and then the 11.0s will catch up later.
Mm. And are you doing that mostly via FreeBSD update, or is it a manual process?
We're doing our own kind of special thing that I hope to announce relatively soon, where we create a boot environment, a perfect boot environment image, and then post it up on our web server and have our servers fetch it, install it, and reboot onto it.
Ooh, that's certainly interesting.
Like, all of our servers are running the exact same image, and allows us to do any customizations we want and ship stuff as part of the OS.
Mm-hmm.
So we make one perfect image and just splat it down onto lots of machines really fast.
Yeah, build once and then distribute to all the others. Well.
And the process takes only about 2 or 3 minutes, because you're just uncompressing this image and feeding it into ZFS receive and then reboot onto it.
Yeah, yet another pro for ZFS or FreeBSD on ZFS. Yeah, it's exciting. Yeah, so check out the new release. And yeah, that's not all for this week. We also have a big series in our news about building a BSD home router, a ZFS and jails. So it's on erielinux.wordpress.com of all places. And it's 7 parts long at this point. So part 1 starts, it's basically a series of blog posts about building a router. And the first part is basically about why you would need a router in the first place. So discussing the need for it and why you want to build your own and how to assemble the APU, the first part. And the second part, so it's all in our show notes, so going over each of those individual blog posts would be a bit long. So we're just giving you the overview of the whole, and you can jump into individual sections. So part 2 is about some Unix history explanation of what a serial console is and why you would need that, because no display most of the time. So that's important to know. Part 3 is about demonstrating the serial access to the APU and covering the firmware updates. So in case you need to, there's a security update coming or there's hardware support being added by the vendor, then you need to know how to apply that firmware update to your machine and can still use your router afterwards. Hopefully better with new functionality or features. Then part 4 covers installing pfSense. So this is basically how to use pfSense and install it on the box, however small it might be. And then the basic configuration of it and, setting up the actual pfSense functionality. Part 5 is about installing OpenSense instead. So if you don't like pfSense for whatever reason, you can use OpenSense, or in case you don't like OpenSense, you can use pfSense. So at this point, you can switch either you read Part 4 for pfSense or Part 5 for OpenSense, and then pick and choose what you like best. Part 6 is about comparison of the two. So pfSense and OpenSense get a little bit more comparison here, pros and cons, and the details are being discussed so people can make a more educated decision, what they like best or what suits them best in their scenario. Part 7, the last one up to this point, is advanced installation of OpenSense. So there's the advanced installation part. The tutorial covers converting an unused partition into swap space. and converting the system to ZFS, which you should use if you have the memory. And after you created a new pool using the partition you just set aside, some of the data sets are created. So ZFS creates a couple of them are being done, and the log files, ports, and object, so user OBJs, where all your object or your compile files will end up, and those data sets are also being mounted by ZFS. And then pretty much the tutorial goes over to cover how to download the ports tree and install additional software for the router that you might want to use. And we're hopefully seeing part 9 soon, or part 8, so we'll watch out for this space, and there will be updates in a future episode maybe. So it's a big thing, and people should take some time to read it, but it's well worth reading because it goes into much detail and will give you hopefully an idea of what's involved with building a router for your home network or any other network. Sounds good. If you are in the networking area already, then you might also like our next headline, which is Be Your Own VPN Provider with OpenBSD this time. So this is version 2. Is that is an update of an existing article?
Yeah, so the existing one was in 2015 and was about an older version of OpenBSD. And this one provides both instructions for upgrading from that one if you are already using it, but clear instructions to start from the beginning if you want, if you haven't already built one. Mm-hmm. But it covers all the different things that you might want to do as a VPN, and in particular it has the list of improvements over the old version is that now they use full disk encryption on the VPN, or on the VPN gateway. So everything's encrypted. They use OpenBSD 6.1, and that provides their new syspatch utility, so you can do binary updates when there's a security advisory instead of having to rebuild stuff. They've added a comparison between OpenVPN and Ipsec and kind of explain why they chose one or the other, but why you might want to do the opposite of that. They've added some stricter firewall rules so that they can cover stuff. They've added a Python script instead of a bash script to take care of blacklisting people that are brute forcing on your VPN node. Added the option of you having a completely separate machine where you generate the certificate authority and sign the certificates if you want to be more secure, using multiple DNS crypt proxies for failover, so that if the DNS crypt node you're using is going down for maintenance, your DNS won't stop working. And then locking down the OpenVPN configuration by making it use TLS 1.2 only, using the fastest ciphers, and using the HMAC SHA-512 instead of SHA-1, etc. And also TLS encryption on the control channel, so it's harder for someone to tell that the traffic going back and forth is actually OpenVPN.
Ah, interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the article starts with an explanation of the difference between Ipsec and OpenVPN and why you might choose one or the other. In particular, they ended up going with OpenVPN because you can pick what port it runs on, and make it one on a well-known port that's more likely to work from, say, hotel or coffee shop Wi-Fi. And the way Ipsec works sometimes is a little bit more complicated to get it past firewalls that you don't control and so on. But Ipsec does work nicely on OpenBSD, so if you want to do it, we've covered a tutorial on that a couple of weeks ago. But this one uses OpenVPN. So then the guide walks you through the installation of OpenBSD using full disk encryption, so that you can have everything encrypted. It also adds a couple of cautions about, while encrypting your disk is great, in this case, they're hosting on a virtual private server hosted by a hosting company. They could snapshot the running system and inspect the memory to get access to the crypto keys. So it's not necessarily 100% protection, but it's better than not having it, right? You just have to understand the limitations of the full disk encryption in the case of you're running on a hostile machine, not your own hardware. Or in the case of running in virtualization in particular, it's much easier for them to extract the contents of memory when you think the machine is powered off, and so on, because they can take a snapshot of the running system. Then the guide goes through locking down your newly installed system, switching the SSH configuration to run on a different port, making it accept keys only instead of passwords, adding some PF rules to block stuff and deal with brute forcing, and configuring do as so that your regular user that logs in can run stuff as root. Then they go through configuring networking, enabling IP forwarding since this machine is going to be the gateway for your VPN. Then they have a large set of firewall rules that will create a NAT, so all the VPN traffic going out will be natted out the IP address of the VPN gateway. But you can see here they tag the traffic as, here's your traffic that's SSH inbound. We want to allow that so that you can connect to your gateway and control it. And then they have traffic to other ports, which they're going to block and add people to a list where they're going to block them. And then they have, VPN traffic coming in on the whatever port you run your VPN on, and then over that tunnel, the traffic that you want to NAT out, and then in particular they hijack the DNS traffic and route that to localhost, where they have a local unbound and DNS crypt proxy running.
This is nice. It's very secure, and it's covering a lot of attack vectors in various ways people could mess with this, but it's not bad.
Yeah. Then they provide some Python scripts for dealing with people who are repeatedly trying to access the VPN gateway and connect to it. There's scripts that will take care of blocking people after so many attempts, as well as scripts that will do a printed report of what's been happening with that. So basically it builds a table in PF, but they also have a script to extract the data back out of that table and print nice statistics here. You can see that it's blocked 9 IPs, and that's caused 496 connections to not be accepted. And it breaks down, top offending IP addresses and top offending port numbers and so on.
Yeah, people like to plot that stuff and see it as a graphical representation. But it's a good way of, figuring out what's going on and how many people are trying to use it.
Yep, and then they will use DNS crypt to make the DNS requests encrypted, and a local unbound to have a DNS cache. This allows us to avoid using the DNS servers of the VPS provider or public ones like Google or whatever, or Open DNS. It's also useful for your future VPN clients to be able to use your VPN server as their DNS server, especially maybe on a mobile device. Before configuring Unbound, there's a local DNS cache, which is a local DNS cache, so that we'll configure it so it makes requests to the DNS crypt proxy. But we're actually going to a load balance failover setup with multiple DNS crypt instances, so that if one of the DNS crypt nodes goes down, your DNS won't stop working. So it shows you how to configure a second one, and then you could do that again to configure a third and fourth one if you needed to.
Yep, that's good stuff.
Then they go through creating a certificate authority, optionally on a separate machine from the VPN gateway, and then using that to issue the server certificate for Open VPN and for each of the clients. And then they go through installing OpenVPN itself and installing the certificates and getting the server configured. And then they provide configurations for a regular client meant for the machine at your house or whatever, but also a different type of configuration for a mobile client that might be connecting from, hotels and random Wi-Fi and things like that. And they show how all that works.
I think IPsec is the thing to use if you are in a relatively static network and not roaming around with your laptop between different locations. But yeah, it's pretty much the same. And blog post is a good guide to get that running.
Yeah. The advantage to IPsec is that the client is built into most operating systems. But the advantage with OpenVPN is you have a little bit more control over what the traffic looks like on the public network. In addition, there's also a link at the end of this article to a specific section of the 2015 article on security versus anonymity, and what settings are trade-off back and forth there, and remembering that just because you're using a VPN doesn't make you completely anonymous, especially in this case if the VPN endpoint traces back to a VPS that you pay for with your credit card. But if you want just security where you're making sure that the hotel or the coffee shop whose Wi-Fi you're using isn't messing with your traffic, then you're definitely getting that from this.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, and it's nice to see that there's not only a blog post, but it's also a continuation of the blog post from 2015, and people who followed that back then or new people can see what's new and see the new benefits. I mean, OpenBSD also got some new features in the meantime, so DoS and stuff. So that's worth checking out and following it.
Yep. And then this week's episode is brought to you by DigitalOcean. If you go over to digitalocean.com, you can spin up a FreeBSD instance in 55 seconds or less. So just a quick way, you can have an endpoint for your own VPN or whatever else you want to use it for. Like a certain person whose name starts with a B really needs to set up a Quasal core so that they can stay on IRC for more than 25 minutes at a time.
One of these days. Yeah, but whatever you want to use, it doesn't have to be IRC. It could also be a full production server or one of the pre-built apps that they provide. So you can just pick one of the apps that they have and deploy this on your DigitalOcean droplet, and then you can make use of whatever you want to use. A blog system like the ever popular WordPress or whatever. The DigitalOcean guys have it all set up for you, and you can just deploy it and run it without having to figure out how to configure it properly.
Yep. They also have their new high CPU instances. If you need more CPU power, but don't want to keep paying for more, memory and disk space, the new high CPU instances are scaled a bit differently. So for the same amount of money, you can get a lot more CPU power. I've started using these for when we do our video streaming because it turns out to be a bit more CPU intensive than it is. We don't really need disk space to do live video streaming. And so we found that the high CPU instances are, in fact, quite a bit better performance-wise as far as the amount of CPU you need. If you don't need a lot, the regular ones work fine. But if you need a lot of CPU, having dedicated CPUs instead of shared makes a big difference.
And you basically just have to use it as long as you want, and then you delete the instance or give it back, basically, and they only charge you for the amount that you used it, and not after.
Yeah, like, for example, I'm going to spin up a bunch of these high CPU instances, but I only need them for Saturday and Sunday. So I'll just pay, 23.8 cents an hour, run them for 2 days, and then delete them. And, in the end, that'll end up costing me less than one of them would have for the whole month.
Yeah. So if you just want to test something or are not sure whether the service is for you, try it out, and you will be pleasantly surprised, I guess.
Yeah, and, and all it takes to get started is a $5 one. That's pretty easy. And turns out, if you like it, type in the coupon code FreeBSD Now in your account, and it'll add an extra $10, and you'll get the second and third month of that $5 one for free.
Well, if that's not an incentive, I don't know what it is.
Indeed. So next up, we have a trip report from some guy named Benedict.
Yours truly, yeah.
Yeah, so this over is on the FreeBSD Foundation blog, you have a detailed post about our trip to Essen, where we had a little hackathon.
Oh, yeah.
We want to send people over there to read that. In particular, to get a feel of what these smaller events feel like compared to the regular conferences, and hopefully that means that they can attend, or even better, organize a similar event in their area, and we can have lots of these little hackathons because they really are very valuable.
It doesn't have to be a whole week or a 4-day conference. It can start small, like a 1-day FreeBSD day or another BSD
we
day.
just did a weekend, right? We just did kind of Saturday and Sunday, basically.
And then get a couple of people from the area together, or even from a wider circle, and then see what happens. I mean, if it's just talking and at the beginning, and then you break out the laptops after a couple of minutes, then it's also fine. Bringing people together is very valuable to get some stuff done.
Yeah, we we didn't actually spend all that much time hacking. We did lots of time barbecuing and talking, and it was very valuable.
Yeah, it's a different kind of collaboration than on the internet, but it's definitely valuable. I mean, it's pretty much a big hallway track or a big hacker lounge, basically, with some interruptions for food. Yeah, it's what I wrote there. It's good to have. It's been our third year that we did this, and I guess the attendance will grow over the years. And we're now looking at a registration system for next year so that the payment is easier to handle and people will know that they have already registered and things like that. It makes the organization part a little bit easier. But yeah, it's a good thing to do a little hacking with like-minded people and find out something. And if you have organized an event, send it to us at feedback@bsdnow.tv and we'll cover it in the show so that other people are also aware of it. So it's time for a news roundup this week. We have a blog post about his self-hosted HTTPD blog by Reik Flöter. He starts the message with, "I really like Twitter because it allows me to share short messages. We have a great community and 140 characters are enough for everybody." And this statement was exactly 140 characters, but sometimes I want to say more than that. And that's why I finally created this new blog. I was never really into blogging because I barely had time or the audience to write long articles. He sometimes wrote short stories for sites like undeadly.org and collected some of them there. But with his own blog, he hosted on Tumblr and never saw any activity. I want to try it again, and this time I decided to create a self-hosted blog. Something that runs on my own server and with HTTPD, the web server that I wrote for OpenBSD. Well, eat your own dog food here. So I was looking for a potential blogging tool that I could use to run his own blog. Besides the popular and heavyweight ones such as WordPress, there are countless other options. I looked at blogs from fellow developers such as Ted Unang's Flag. We've covered a couple of times in the show. He likes the fact that it's written in Lua, but the implementation is a bit over his head. Pelican, that is used by Peter Hessler for Bad.network, but sorry, I don't like Python. And finally, Christap's blog that is used for all of his projects and blogs, and blog entries there. So he decided to use SBLG, the one that Christaps is using. And Christaps keeps on releasing very useful free software. Most well-known is Mandoc, at least everyone is using it for man pages these days. But there's also his BCHS, or Beaches web stack, which strongly advertises OpenBSD's HTTPD. Great. I also use KCGI, where I have to write small CGIs, or Common Gateway Interface scripts. So SBLG seems like the right choice to me. Let me quickly iterate over my current makefile. I keep on tweeting this file, so it it might have been changed by the time you are reading this article. Please note that the makefile is written for OpenBSD's make, a distant derivative of pmake, which is not like GNU make. And Reich continues to write that he's not a designer or web developer, but I appreciate good-looking web pages. I wanted to have something that is responsive, works on desktops and mobiles, looks somewhat modern, works without JavaScript, oh yes, but doesn't disqualify me for the eye candy of a geek point of view. He bootstrapped the theme by creating a simple grid layout with a fairly typical block style: banner, top menu, middle text, and sidebar. In 2017, Bootstrap is probably a vintage or retro framework, but it makes it very easy to create responsive pages with a proper layout and without caring about all the CSS and HTML5 madness too much. He also uses Font Awesome because it is awesome, provides some fancy icons, and has been suggested by SBLG's example templates. Let's blame Kristaps for it. I do not include any JavaScript which prevents me from using Bootstrap's responsive hamburger menu. Okay. He continues, I have to admit that Reichflöter is not an ideal name for a blog. My actual name is Reichflöter, and I normally use my first name Reich as a user and nickname. But it was taken when
I think people might have missed the important bit there. So Reich's name is spelled F-L-O with little dots on top, T-E-R.
Yeah.
But that gets, anglicized to Flöter, which is F-L-O-E-T-E-R. So he's saying, well, the domain name is how you'd spell his name in English. That's not his actual name. And so obviously it's kind of a confusing name for his website.
Although you can have umlauts now in domain names, it looks ugly when you see it.
Your actual domain name ends up being like XN -- gibberish.
Yeah, not very nice to enter it into a browser bar. Anyway, so he picked that one in a few places. And he's aware that his German last name is nearly unpronounceable for others. That's why, that's what Alan mentioned just now, that maybe some of these might not be very, if he had used his real name, then this might not be the proper typable name. In addition to the domain, he also needed a good blog name or tagline. A very memorable example in the BSD world is Peter Hanstein's That Grumpy BSD Guy blog. So what should he use? Reich Flöter's blog, Open Bsd Hacker, Coffee Nerd, Founder, Ask Reich, Imaginary How-Tos and 10-Step Guides, Sewage, Drainage, and BSD Plumbing, bsd.plumbing /blog. Oh, I like that one. A replacement call for Random, arkforrandom.com, or Coffee with Reich, copper.coffee. Oh, that's a URL. Oh, wow, that's a nice thing. But for now, it will just be Reich Flöter blog. Okay, yeah, good luck with the blog. And if people have suggestions for a catchphrase or a different name, then by all means, send it to Reich.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's got some more detail, and if you go read the post, it walks through actually setting it up and integrating it all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll look up for it when there are a couple of blog posts about OpenBSD on it, and we'll cover that in a future show, of course.
This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by IX Systems. They're definitely the people you should talk to if you need a server for open source, because they have all the latest and greatest Intel stuff in stock and ready to go, and they know how it works and which one you need. The important thing when you get in touch with them is to explain what it is you need to do, not just tell them which hardware you want, because then you can take advantage of their experience and expertise about which combination of hardware is actually going to work the best for you. And speaking of that, they have their very schwanky new hardware, the TrueNAS X10, which is their third generation of their TrueNAS storage line. What's really nice is that the cost is not that high. You can get the base unit for about $5,500, and you can get it in various configurations. The 20 terabyte non-high availability model is under $10,000, and you can build a 120 terabyte configuration for under $20,000.
That's quite flexible.
I mean, space.
Yeah.
And with the two storage shelves, it can actually be updated or made as big as 360 terabytes, which is enough to support, or even with the 20 terabyte one, that's enough to support 7,000 virtual desktop instance VMs at a cost of about $3 per VM. That's a really nice way to virtualize the machines at your office. And the non-HA version is only 138 watts of power and 2 U's of rack space.
Oh yeah, that's part of the equation when you're buying new servers, how much additional cost of this system will, not just in just running it, but also, cooling and rack space and also the watts per minute and stuff like that. It all goes back into the equation of whether you need such a system. And IX System can help you in that way as well if you want to be a cost-effective system that still has the horsepower to solve your problem.
Yeah, it's basically everything you need ready to go, and it's fully expandable. So even if you start with a smaller one at the very low price tag, you can expand it all the way up to 360 terabytes of space and adding NVMe devices to increase your caches. And it's got upgradable 10 gigabit connectivity and everything you might need. So head over to ixsystems.com/BSD Now and get in touch with them. Tell them we sent you, and they'll be extra nice. And, tell them
They're nice
what
by
your next
default.
project is and let them do most of the work for you.
Yep. Good stuff.
Yes. So now, speaking of work, we have some interesting research here over from research.switch.com about shell globbing. So this is, when you type ABC star to match any file that starts with ABC. And so they say, here's a straightforward benchmark. How long does it take to run ls A star B? How long does it take if you put more A stars in front of it? So for their benchmark, they created a file that's the letter A 100 times, then the letter B. And then they started running ls A star B, A star B, A star 3 times B, 4 times B, 5 times B, etc., and watched how long it took. As you can see from this little graph here, with 6 times, didn't take very long at all. Less than a measurable amount of time. With 7, it took almost a minute. That's weird. With 8, it took 9 minutes. What? Yeah. But turns out if you use ls and then grep, using basically a straightforward regular expression, instead of having ls do the shell matching, or rather the OS libc do the shell matching, you can find all 100 in about 5 milliseconds. Whereas it would take immeasurably long on the shell one. Yeah, so with A star 8 times, it took 7.2 minutes to do it with the shell and 1.56 milliseconds to do it with grep. So
that's probably
700 or 275,000 times faster.
There's some filtering going on in grep already that makes that hopefully.
So they compared different shells, looking at dash, bash, RC, ZSH, Plan 9's RC, KSH, TCSH, and CSH. And they found that they were pretty much all had the same problem, except old-fashioned Berkeley CSH.
Why is that?
So basically, the same thing going on here with the regular expression article. Backtracking was the obvious implementation strategy, and most implementations use it, but that causes this performance cliff. And so the exception was Berkeley CSH, which runs in linear time, means it takes the same amount of time always, more precisely time linear to the number of start wildcard characters you have. He says, looking at this source code, it doesn't attempt to perform glob expansion itself. Instead, it calls the C library implementation of glob, which runs in linear time, at least on the Linux systems. So maybe we should look at programming language implementations. And they found that glibc, Ruby, Go, and Rust did the right thing. But Java, Perl, Python, and TCL, and the BSD libc did the wrong thing. They say, perhaps the most interesting fact evident in the graph is that GNU libc, the C library used by most Linux systems, has a linear time glob implementation, but BSD-C, the C library used by BSD and macOS, has an exponential time implementation. They say in this in the graph there, PHP is not shown in the graph because its glob function simply invokes the host C library, so it depends what OS you run it on, how it works.
Okay.
They say then they looked at different FTP daemons and see what they did, and found that VSFTPD, ProFTPD, Plan 9's FTPD, and Netkit all ran in linear time, whereas Pure FTPD and TN FTPD ran in exponential time. although pure FTPD cuts off early, they have a protection against a denial of service attack there by limiting the number of stars you can put in the glob and just returning an error if you put more than, I think, 6 or 7, so that it never ends up taking that long. They say the Netkit FTPD runs quickly on Linux because it relies on the host C library. If you run it on BSD, the Netkit FTPD also shows the problem.
Mm-hmm. This is a nice benchmark, actually.
Mm-hmm. They say, obviously, not many servers have a file named A 100 times, then followed B.
Hopefully
the pattern
not.
can be adapted to shorter, less useful names, which gives a denial of service attack against some anonymous FTP servers. It appears that TN FTPD is derived from the standard FreeBSD FTPD, so some BSD systems may be affected as well. And they talk about initially they didn't make the connections to FTP, and that they could be easily used as a denial of service attack or whatever. But in some research, they saw some CVEs going back to 2001 and some others going back to 2010, specifically for these type of things. And this is why some FTP servers have this glob limit directive that limits the number of stars that can be there to avoid the problem. Including there was one in 2015 where the same vulnerability in OS X's FTP server. They say, unfortunately, none of these protections address the cost of matching a single path element of a single file name. And they show an attack against WU FTPD from 2005.
Okay.
And they talk a bit more about it, and they have some details on the implementation of the actual code they used, showing where the problem is and how it all works, and what some of the fixes are. And in particular, they have some updates. NetBSD has fixed their libc glob limitation, and that will be part of the next release. And so I looked at it. It's relatively similar to the FreeBSD one, because I imagine they both came from the same original BSD code, but not exactly the same, such that we can just apply their patch. I had hoped to get to look at that at the hackathon we were at, but ran out of time. But hopefully next week at BSD Cambridge, maybe I can get somebody else to take a look at this, and maybe we can get that solved quickly. They also note that Perl has an update pending for the next release that will solve this, and Pure FTPD has added a check where they've lowered the limit so that a pattern must have no more than 3 stars in it to protect people from OSs that are not fixed yet.
Yeah.
And they also point out that in Python, what they do is just convert the globs into a regular expression and execute it that way.
Okay. Would be interesting to detrace that as well, to do the measurements, to find out the actual number of seconds or minutes it takes.
You don't really need detrace in this case. You can just time running ls, and I the way I checked this on my system was to create the file and do it with like 6, 7, 8, and 9 stars and watch how long it took.
Yeah, for that, if you go to real detailed measuring and want to fine-tune the last seconds out of it, then you would detrace. But other than that,
right. In this case, it's just a recursion problem. So.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see some updates there, some speed improvements, and more testing maybe on other systems.
So tell us about the next story.
Yeah, the next story is called the BSD VPS Providers Needed, and it's from torbsd.github.io. And
so in particular, this is from the Tor Diversity project, which is a project that includes George Rosenman and a bunch of other people who are trying to increase the diversity of operating systems that run Tor nodes. In particular, the majority of them are Linux, and they want to get more OpenBSD FreeBSD and NetBSD in there so that if there's a bug in Linux at some point, it doesn't take out the majority of the Tor network.
Yeah. Didn't they also have a session at BSDCan, like in the launch time?
About this at BSDCan during one of the Birds of a Feather sessions. Yeah.
Yeah. So there might be some activity as a result of that. But it starts with one of the TDP's recent projects is accumulating a list of virtual private servers, or VPS, that provide a BSD option. VPSs are generally inexpensive services that enable the user to only concern themselves with software configuration and not be bothered with hardware or basic operating system setup. In the pre-cloud era, VPS providers were the other people's computers that users outsourced their systems to. The same shortcomings of cloud services apply to VPS providers. You don't control the hardware, your files are likely viewable by users up to the directory hierarchy level, and the entropy source or pool is a single source for multiple systems. The same time drift applies to all timekeeping services. Nevertheless, VPS services are often cheap and provide a good spread of terms of geography. All a provider really needs is a few server-grade computers and a decent network connection. VPSs are still a gateway drug to bare metal servers, although it seems more and more of these gateways users stop at stage 1. Cheap systems with a public IP are also a great way to tinker with a new operating system. For this reason, the TDP created this list of BSD VPS providers. Some explicitly deny running Tor as a server, some just reference vague proxy services. Others don't mention Tor or proxies at all. The list is a start with currently just under 70 VPS providers listed. Input through various channels are already started, and TDP intends to update the list over the coming months. A first draft email and open letter addressed to the providers were drafted, and they are looking to speak directly to at least some of the better-known BSD VPS providers. We may be able to convince a few to allow public Tor relays, or at least published bridges. These providers could be new BSD users' gateway drug into the world of BSD Tor nodes. Running a Tor relay shouldn't be considered a particularly risky activity. Maybe we can adjust that perception. And let us know any input by email or GitHub, and we'll be glad to make updates. Yeah, so if you know a VPS provider that is interested or already does this, then get back to the Tor BSD Diversity project. We linked to it in the show notes, and you can get more information on their website. So, time for our Beastie Bits this week. The first one is avoid OS detection with OpenBSD, and it starts with you know what we say about OpenBSD: free, functional, and secure.
Yeah.
So it's a longer one.
They say hosting a public server can lead to many different attacks, mostly random attacks, but you can get targeted by real attackers as well, who first will want to gather information like what OS are you running. Say actually finding what system runs on a server is easy. Nmap can usually tell just by sending a couple of packets.
They have some passive OS detection built in there. Yeah, OS detection tools use a lot of data like TCP ISN sampling, TCP options support and ordering, IP ID sampling, and Windows size check. So all these can give you information about what kind of TCP stack is being used, and from that you can relatively surely trace back which operating system is using this in which version, and similar things. But because we are running OpenBSD and using its powerful firewall named Packet Filter, or PF, we can do something about this. Because packet normalization under Packet Filter is called scrubbing, it will reassemble fragmented packets, protecting some operating systems from some forms of attack, and drops TCP packets that would have invalid flag combinations. Many options are built with Scrub. You can check them here. There's a link in the blog post. And the article will focus on two of them. The first one is random ID, and the second is no DF. So random ID is what it does. It replaces the IP identification field of the outgoing packet with random values to compensate for operating systems that use predictable values. And this option only applies to outgoing packages that are not fragmented after the optional packet reassembly.
Yeah, so it means that it can re-randomize those so that when somebody's trying to fingerprint them, they won't see the predictable numbers.
Yeah, it will screw up their findings or don't give them any findings at all. So what NoDF does, it clears the don't fragment bit from the IP packet header. Some operating systems are known to generate fragmented packets with the don't fragment bit set. This is particularly true with NFS, and Scrub will drop such packets unless the NoDF option is specified, because some operating systems generate don't fragment packets with a 0 IP identification header field, but using NoDF in conjunction with random ID is recommended. So,
by applying these things, when you run Nmap and look at it, you'll see that the uptime will be reported as 0, and that the TCP sequence prediction will say is too difficult, and the IP ID sequence generation will be listed as randomized, and they will, it won't match any of the fingerprints. Although, at some point, you figure out that, oh, well, if it's that well randomized, it's probably a BSD.
Yeah, it's a cat and mouse game, but screwing up some scanners who shouldn't know about your operating system, because that's usually a precursor for a larger attack for a specific vulnerability, if there is one. Give them a little bit of trouble to figure out what's behind your firewall. It's part of the security layering. Okay, yeah, check out that article and maybe add this to your PF config file to be a little bit more secure about OS detection.
Yep. Then I say they have another one here. A new very small hotfix released today or yesterday over at TrueOS. We believe that this was breakage from the INO64 work that was merged into the Unstable branch and caused the TrueOS updater to have issues. After some tinkering, a patch to fix the updater is now available for both the stable and unstable branches. This update is installed using the built-in sysadm update manager. This is a small hotfix to adjust the way in which the updater bootstraps itself and updates a TrueOS system. Because this is an updater fix, many users may need to update the system twice, once to fix the updater and then once to actually update the system. Given feedback in our issue tracker or discussion forums, if you're still encountering problems with the updater after implementing this fix, make sure you open an issue.
Yep, because the feedback is important, and if there are some regressions from that, then people should report this by all means. Our next little bit is Midnight BSD in VirtualBox install, which is a YouTube video people can watch to see how this is going to be done. And it's pretty much an install session from start to finish. And in VirtualBox, it's easy to experiment with.
In particular, this is by Lucas Holt, who is the guy behind the Midnight BSD project. So if anybody can walk you through setting up Midnight BSD, it'll be him.
Oh yeah, it's good to give it a run in VirtualBox and see what features it has and what it can do. We need a little bit more news from Midnight BSD. If they're doing good stuff, then by all means we should report them.
And then, so if you're watching this live, you still have a chance. Although if you're watching it, the recorded version when it comes out, we had to record a bit early to deal with our ridiculous schedule coming up for the next 2 months. You'll have missed the one we're talking about, but if you follow the link, you'll be able to keep up with upcoming ones. So, if you live in the Portland area, there's this website called Calligator. I guess it's some combination of calendar and alligator. I don't know why. I guess it's a calendar aggregator. Anyway, they have events, and you can, if you search for the tag BSD, you'll see BSD themed events going on in Portland. And if you pay attention, there's actually quite a few. They have the Portland Linux/Unix users group, which has its meetings like once a month, plus an advanced topics meeting a second time during the month. But also there is BSD Pizza Night. BSD Pizza Night happens on a particular Thursday at least once a month. The next one is July 27th, although if you're not watching live, that one's already over, but pay attention for the next one. The BSD Pizza Night is a bunch of BSD people meeting up for pizza and drinks and talking about it for the evening. And it happens at a different pizza place each time. So they've been doing it for quite a while, so they've been to quite a few different places. But it means that there's a good chance that they will come to one near you soon. But you should definitely check it out. that's ends up being how I found my Google Summer of Code student. Was they randomly happened into this BSD pizza night and met up with some BSD pros like Rod Grimes and Michael Dexter and got sucked into it all. And now they're my minion.
Yeah, you never know what happens if you go to one of those events. And it's easy to replicate in other places.
I would very much love it if at least once a month I could meet up with a bunch of BSD people and just hang out for the afternoon or evening.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, you should check out, if you're in the Portland area, you should check out this Caligator site and see that they have lots of events posted here for, BSD pizza nights. You can see where they've been in the past. They're usually a later Thursday sometime in the month and happen from 7 to 9 p.m. So if you've never been to one and you do show up to one because you heard about it here, make sure you're ready to tell us about that.
We can also tell you other cool things in our feedback and questions section, but before we go to that one, we should mention our sponsor for this section, which is Tarsnap, the online backups for the truly paranoid. So if you ever had the need to backup, and you did, and you still do, if you haven't done it yet, you should think about using Tarsnap, because if you have to have backups in the cloud, like Tarsnap offers, you have to secure them. And if you secure them, you should be the only person who has the decryption key. And that's what's happening in Tarsnap. So in Tarsnap, you encode locally on your machine. Then the backups get uploaded to the Tarsnap cloud. And there, no one will be able to access it because you're the only person holding the key. So not even the Tarsnap people or Colin Percival, who runs Tarsnap, can decrypt that. And Tarsnap has also made a couple of their reusable components. So the whole Tarsnap source code is not available as open source, but some of the components that are being used for Tarsnap are available. So there's the script key derivation function, the Kivalu data store, and the S-pipe-D secure pipe daemon can also be gotten or received from Tarsnap.
Yep. Tarsnap also had a release recently. They've added support for OpenSSL 1.1 and the newer API, and they've added an ISO dates option so that the dates will be printed in the regular, year, month, day, hour, minute, second format rather than the traditional Unix format. And they added an override so that when you ask Tarsnap to do decryption or encryption with a very, very strong key and it thinks your system can handle it, it warned you about that, but there's now a flag to make it do it anyway. Ludicrous mode.
Yeah, let the CPU work a little bit longer and harder.
You can also see the actual changes between the versions by heading over to the Tarsnap or the Tarsnap Git repository. In particular, why would you trust any backup software unless you can read the source code?
Yeah, if you don't...
no other way for you to know, they can tell you that the encryption happens on your machine and the key never goes out to them. But unless you have the option of looking at the source code, then can you really trust that that's right?
Yeah. And that's why it's really for the truly paranoid people who are mistrusting everything and everyone.
So, question time.
The first one is from Andrew about BSD CAN videos. So it's short and sweet. He writes, "Hi Alan and Benedict. Did I hear Alan mention BSD CAN videos? Is there a link somewhere to them?"
They're not out yet, but I'm hoping for them quite soon.
The video crew has been busy recording, so they should. I'm not sure how quickly they got to the rendering, but I actually look forward to them as well because I haven't watched some of the parallel tracks that I couldn't get to.
I think at this point it's mostly verifying that the right title and speaker and so on name got put on each video, and then putting all the links into the BSD CAN website. Hopefully soon. I know Dan's very busy, so I'm working on coordinating a volunteer with him so that they can get that all done.
Yeah, and if we know that they are there and people report that to us, we will cover it in a future show, of course.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Andrew, for that question. Next up is Mark with the Rock64 board. There's a link here to www.pine64.org, and there's a link to the actual board. It has 4 gigabytes of DRAM, 4-core ARM system, and it costs $44. And he's hoping the BSD crew will support it, and it gets here one love from FreeBSD. So you have that board.
I would hope so. I wonder how close it is to a regular Pine 64, which works quite well on FreeBSD. Although I know that I and a bunch of other people bought Pine books from the Pine 64 people, and we're mostly harping on the ARM guys to get those working first. But I would hope that the Rock 64 would be on their list as well.
Yeah, with all these embedded boards.
Yeah, hopefully it's not much different than the Pine 64, and that makes it easier.
Yeah, code reuse would be helpful, and not having a specific code tree or subtree for each individual board revision or each individual manufacturing type that's out there. But it's good that people are getting more into the embedded space and want to use FreeBSD on it. And yeah, we should try to support that as much as possible. And if you have a board that's interesting or has similar hardware, then try FreeBSD or any BSD on it and see what messages you get or what errors are coming up, if any. Then report that to the developers, and that way we can get more support going. Okay, next up is Jason with a follow-up on Uefi and Beehive. So we had a question a couple of weeks ago, I think. Mm-hmm. And this is pretty much a follow-up because we asked if people knew about any specifics on Uefi and Beehive. So he writes, Gents, I wanted to touch base with this issue and let you know I sorted it out. While you could not directly leave me the answer, Alan did mention, I don't think Beehive has a way to store EFI vars, which led to a tiny bit of investigation. Simply put, Ubuntu/grub EFI does not follow the spec for EFI when it comes to default paths. He checked his Arch VM for the configuration he had there with systemd boot, also known as gummy boot, and found that it followed spec and placed EFI /EFI/boot/boot x64.efi in the ESP and had no issues. So his problem was not that Beehive was losing settings, but rather that it never had them in the first place, and grub had decided to behave in a way that didn't follow the standard behaviors. Oh, I heard that before. While this would normally work perfectly fine, due to the lack of viable configuration store for the EFI vars, it will not work out of the box. So the simple answer is basically make dir /boot/EFI/EFI/boot, and then copy the grub x64.efi to that exact directory.
Yeah, so normally you can use an EFI variable to say, use this other path instead of the default path, but because Beehive doesn't store that, it fails to boot the Ubuntu one. Now we have the tools to manage the EFI vars in FreeBSD 11.1, as we talked about earlier in the show. So we're hoping that Beehive will have the ability to persist that as well, although that's going to end up requiring to be written somewhere. And I don't know if we want to have some little database file or something hanging off the side of your VM that stores that. So I'm not sure how they're going to manage that just yet. But eventually that issue will be easier to deal with. But yes, for now, the answer is to get Ubuntu to install it to the right place or copy it there to make it work.
But that's not all. We have a follow-up question also from Patrick about EFI booting.
I guess this one's less of a follow-up question than him providing the answer that we were looking for.
Yeah, it's similar.
The problem is that, if he recalls correctly, Beehive does not emulate a proper EFI firmware that can store settings in some non-volatile area. Beehive doesn't have a place where it can store this, so it doesn't store the variables. So most importantly, the boot path, the location of the bootloader on the EFI FAT ESP is not stored. So regular server firmware and BIOSes can do this, and so Ubuntu works there. So the problem faced with running Ubuntu inside of Beehive is that Beehive installs under EFI Ubuntu instead of EFI boot, and Beehive's not able to remember that it needs to look there every time you shut it down. It might be possible to move stuff around, but I was reluctant to do so because I did not want to mess the bits up that belong to the Ubuntu installation and were supposed to be managed and maintained by the Ubuntu system. So what Patrick's solution was to install Refind, which is a dedicated EFI menu system that you would install in the default location, the boot x64. And then it brings up a menu of all the other EFIs it can find in the EFI partition and allows you to select which one you want. And then you can boot Ubuntu that way. So by installing Refind in the default location in Beehive, you get the menu and it will boot the one you want when it starts up.
Yeah,
so
that's
it's a dedicated EFI first stage bootloader that can then bootstrap more or less arbitrary second stage OS specific bootloaders, even grub in this case. So you install that in the default location, then it will find that is able to call grub in the default Ubuntu location. After fiddle with some of the settings just a little bit, you can eliminate the unwanted entries from the boot menu, set the default second stage loader, set a short timeout, provide fancy icons and so on, and you can have multi-OS installation just working. That's how I've used Refind on my laptop to choose between a vanilla FreeBSD, a true OS, and a Windows install that I use for recording interviews on my laptop that I use to give presentations at BSD conferences.
Yep, so there are multiple ways to solve that, and maybe Beehive will grow its own EFI functionality in the future, but for now we can work around this in different ways. And thanks for you guys sending us these solutions so people can use them as well. Yeah, that should be it for this week. Don't forget to submit us questions for our reader interview that we're going to have roughly in September. We already got a couple of them, but if you want to send us your own questions, then use the subject line viewer interview questions. And then you can pretty much ask Alan or me or both anything you ever wanted to know or you always wanted to know about us. And we'll cover it in that special show we're going to do in September, sometime around there. Yeah, other than that, thanks for watching this week's episode and see you next time.
Yes, make sure you send us more questions because, as I mentioned, our schedule is a bit crazy with BSD Cam. Benedict's got a trip, and then we got VBSDCon and EuroBSDCon all coming up. So we're kind of getting a little bit ahead in recording so that you get an episode every single week. But in order to make that possible, we need more questions. Otherwise, we're going to run out because of the number of episodes we have to record ahead of time. So please send questions to feedback@bsdnow.tv. And yes, for the interviews of Benedict and myself, we need more interview questions. So write those in with the subject viewer interview question, and we will get on top of that.